Innovation 2016, as most of you know, is a show about the intersection of technology, politics, and the 2016 election, the presidential election. Today, fortunately, we have our first candidate on Innovate 2016, Governor Martin O'Malley. Martin, you are running on an innovation platform. You claim that your experience as both governor of Maryland and mayor of Baltimore enables you to become, if you like, the innovation president. Explain what you will do if you become, in innovation terms, in economic terms, if you become president.
Well, look, I grew up in an era where innovation and technology was going through rapid iterations and changing the world around us. And so I am accustomed to that pace of change. I embrace that change. I remember when I was elected mayor of Baltimore, I think 90% of our requests from citizens for potholes or fixing the curb or those sorts of things came in terms of mail. By the time I was done 7 years later in my service as mayor, 90% of our requests came via email and over the internet. So that's a pretty rapid change. I received the Innovations in Government Award from the Kennedy School at Harvard in 2001. And here was my big innovation. I used technology to measure the outputs of government on a weekly basis instead of using a big floppy budget book on an annual basis to measure the inputs. And that was the innovation. So what I see happening all across our country is that entrepreneurial men and women in the office of mayor or county executive at the local level have embraced the ability to use information to create common platforms, feedback loops, make it open and transparent to every citizen so that all of us in this endeavor know whether we're doing any better this week than we were last week on delivering those services, those goods that define progress for our common good. So as governor, our state was named the most entrepreneurial and innovative, or #1 in innovation and entrepreneurship 3 years in a row from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And Andrew, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce rarely says good things about Democratic governors in any state. But the reason that we received that award was that we did not rest on our laurels. Instead, we looked at the assets in our innovation economy in our state, and we worked to build upon them in life science and biotech, in cyber. And we did that by creating an inclusive and diverse state where we welcome the diversity, we welcome new American immigrants, and we also did it by investing in the education of our children, increasing the number of kids that take and pass STEM-related AP courses in our high schools to the highest in the country, and also identifying those weaknesses in our ecosystem, if you will, like venture capital, and taking actions like the Invest Maryland Venture Fund to seed and strengthen that sort of venture capital piece of our ecosystem. So the bottom line is this: as president, I think that we are in need of a new leader who looks at our economy in ecosystemic terms, who doesn't look at it as sort of this sector versus that sector, doesn't look at it in terms of government versus business, but understands that this is all about an ecosystem of supply and demand, of creating new solutions to human problems that can be more widely and quickly dispersed throughout our population. And that needs to guide our policy decisions.
Martin, I know you spend a lot of time in Silicon Valley. You have a lot of support.
Not enough.
Well, you have a lot of supporters out there, a lot of people very interested in you. A couple of questions. Firstly, what can the Silicon Valley experience, what you might call the Silicon Valley ecosystem, what can that tell us about enriching the American future? And secondly, what can you or what have you learned personally and in political terms from the Silicon Valley experience?
Well, I think what Silicon Valley, which is just a hotbed of innovation and new thinking, and I think what Silicon Valley can teach the rest of the country is just how rapidly our economy is changing, and and it can point the way to the sort of skills that we need to be much more conscious of, that our economy needs, so that that can guide our actions for our kids. In other words, stated perhaps more plainly, in every generation we upskill our population so that we can fill the jobs that are being created today rather than the jobs that were created in our parents' generation. And I think Silicon Valley is pointing the way forward to that. The movement of coding for all I think has within it the opportunity to reinvigorate the way we think about high school education, to create market-relevant skills and put them in the hands of our kids by the time they graduate from high school so that they can fill the jobs that are in demand today. In our own state, we increased by 400% CTE offerings in IT and cyber, and that's just sort of the beginning. I think there's a lot more that we need to do as a nation to give our people the skills to compete in this modern economy, and I think Silicon Valley points the way forward to that.
If you become president, do you think Silicon Valley needs to be more or less regulated? There's more and more chatter, both in Europe in particular, but also in Washington, D.C., about the need to regulate especially some of the larger Silicon Valley companies, the Googles, the Amazons, the Apples of this world.
I think it's all about balance, isn't it? I mean, the key word that I find myself using as an executive and a modern mayor, a modern governor, is not so often the word regulate as the word collaborate. I mean, that's what we need new systems to be able to do, and a new discipline out of the White House. Not episodic, not driven by crises, but a regular way to collaborate and to figure out the big challenges that we face. I mean, one of them being in security and national security. I mean, how do we offer encryption and fulfill that need, which is a legitimate need in our economy, but at the same time have avenues that allow, with a warrant and probable cause, our federal government to be able to protect us from terror cells and those sorts of threats. I mean, it's all about balance. I think our enduring principles remain, but we need to collaborate and figure out ways that we make them real in a technological world where communication isn't by phone so much and not by snail mail, but electronic. But how do we still apply those principles of the sanctity of the post and our prohibition against warrantless searches and make them real in our time? That requires collaboration.
In a recent debate, one of your televised debates, Hillary Clinton made it very clear that Silicon Valley needed to work on encryption technology. She also said that she didn't know enough about technology to explain how it could work. Do you share her call for Silicon Valley to come up with technology that can solve so many of both the surveillance and privacy issues?
I do. I think all of us have look, the nature of warfare has changed. The nature of conflict has changed. And we have to change and adapt more quickly than the threats are adapting. I do believe that there needs to be greater collaboration between all levels of our society in order to meet this threat. So, and I'm sure we can figure it out. I mean, here in my own state, NSA is located geographically in the center of our state. I have oftentimes walked through the halls of NSA. There are a lot of patriotic men and women there for talk about diversity that are doing important work there to keep our country safe. And I believe that what we have failed to do in the past as leaders in government is to move away from giving the orders of command and control from high atop the hierarchy, and instead to put ourselves in the middle of an emerging truth and ask the right questions with people from different perspectives. It's been my experience that if you put 10 or 12 people around a problem with different perspectives and continue to ask the right questions, you're going to get the innovative responses that get you to the goal. In this case, the goal is to protect our national security without surrendering our privacy.
Martin, you've been very outspoken about the need to correct some of the economic imbalances between the very rich and the very poor and to rebuild the middle class in America. How can technology help in that fight?
Look, one of the booming sectors of our economy is information and technologies. And I think that as we work to close what's a growing opportunity gap, so much of it is about the skills of our people. And we, in every generation, for a long time, until recently, we understood that the more a person learns, the more a person would earn, and the better they and their families would do. I believe that technology can play a big role in helping us to make college degrees a debt-free option again in the United States. Technology has played a huge role in helping us to close the health disparity gap in my own city and in our own state. Technology can play a big role in terms of the job opportunities and the openings that are out there for entry-level positions where a kid can learn by the time they graduate from high school how to do jobs that are actually in demand in our state in cyber and other technological fields. So in all of these ways, technology can help on these things. In the past, I think a lot of our policies focused on making the institutions profitable instead of serving the public good, whether that public good was wellness or with the education level of an individual person. And technology has a way of kind of flattening those hierarchies and those silos and going right to the individual in ways that are personalized, whether it's personalized learning, whether it's personalized medicine. And I think all of these things offer tremendous promise, provided we have the leadership that can return us to our true selves in terms of wage and labor policies that guarantee that wages go up rather than down, investments in our own country's infrastructure, increasingly now cyber, and thirdly, facing our biggest challenges, and I believe one of the biggest is climate change and making it a business opportunity.
Speaking of wages and the importance of making sure that people are fairly paid for their labor, what do you make of the recent controversies about the sharing economy, the series of legal cases about how sharing companies like Uber and Lyft should treat their drivers? Should they have both moral and legal responsibilities to their drivers in the fashion of the old economy? Or are we moving into a 1099 economy where everyone is responsible for looking after themselves and no one is attached to particular firms?
I use Uber all the time. In fact, little known fact, Shervin Pishavar is from Maryland. Did you know that?
He could probably finance your whole state, or certainly your campaign.
Blair High School, I do believe. Was it Blair High School? Anyway, yeah, Shervin is from Maryland. We're very proud of him. So in the shared economy, I think it's important that we that we modernize our labor laws and that we have shared security. So I do believe that if a person's working 3 part-time jobs, the technological fix is there that would allow a person to have that safety net that other people have when they work for one employer 40, 60 hours a week. So I think it's a mistake I think it would be a mistake if we leave behind us those sorts of safety nets, whether it's unemployment insurance, disability insurance. In fact, we lag other developed nations when it comes to things like paid family leave. And so in a sharing economy, much more freedom. People can work 2 or 3 different jobs, but I think that should not therefore be a move, or let me state it positively. I believe that in a positive way, we also need to come up with new ways so that in the shared economy, there's also shared security so that people are not made more vulnerable and become, by merit of the fact that they work 2 or 3 part-time jobs.
What are jobs in the future? Do they change? You claim to be running for president in terms of new leadership. Will there be new jobs? Will there be jobs? After all, one of the great debates in Silicon Valley and elsewhere is of the role of artificial intelligence in terms of how we work. How do you envisage jobs in the future?
Yeah, this is a huge issue, the whole robot thing, huh? The
March of the Robots. In fact, that book won, Martin Ford's book won the Financial Times Book of the Year this year. So this is a big issue, a central issue.
It sure is. There's a deep human need. Every human being has a need to be needed. We're the only species on the planet without full employment. Without jobs, there is no progress. So we have to In every generation, there's always, though, the march of automation. We've seen this before, and I know that some great scholarship's been written that says this time is different. But there's still a whole lot of work that needs to be done in this world. I mean, my God, you look around the heart of any big American city, you look at the challenges in terms of poverty and health and education and all of these sorts of things. There is work to be done. And so there's also a tremendous amount of work that needs to be done in terms of rebuilding our built environment in ways that are conducive to a clean, green, 100% distributed energy grid. So what does that mean? That means that we need to seed a whole new generation of living buildings, net zero homes, places where we can do that in the great.
And those will create jobs.
Those will create jobs. And I've rolled out, I'm the only candidate so far to put forward a new agenda for America's cities. It involves greater mobility, greater investments in transit, but also using cities as the cutting edge in this movement to a clean, green energy future, which means a much more robust effort in terms of retrofitting buildings, a new era of workforce housing so that our city centers can become more economically inclusive.
Smart cities, in other words.
Smart cities, yes, smart cities, but also smart buildings, smart energy grids. It used to be that energy was always, traditionally energy is produced in one centralized place and then it goes out over a grid and then it's used at the end. This is not much more of a circulatory system, like the blood flow in your own body, where there'll still be baseload electricity in the future, but a lot of it will come from what used to be the end point will become the beginning point.
So the sharing economy comes to energy and changes everything.
I think the energy transformation is the transformation that changes everything. Climate change is the transformation that changes everything. But that is a huge front for the creation of new jobs in our country. But there are other avenues for job creation as well. The key is what we've learned how to do in the past. This is not the first time that the economy's changed. But when the economy changes as dramatically as technology is making our economy changes, people get hurt. And that's why it's so important that leaders and governments have a framework for how we upskill and get ahead of the wave of change, so we're giving our kids the tools they need to be winners in a changing economy. That's what we have been doing here in Maryland, and it would seem to be working. And that's what we need to do throughout our country. We've had an ability in the past to always anticipate change and to harness that change for the good of our people, and that's what we need to do now. But in order to do that, we have to be mindful that we all share a common platform, if you will, and a common good. It's called a country. And there are investments that we must make as a nation if we're going to get ahead of this wave in a way that preserves the belief we share in the dignity of every person, the dignity of all work, and the American truth that we all do better when we're all doing better. And that's what we need to be able to do. Otherwise, we're going to face situations where we become a society where we tear each other apart.
Well, clearly there are two things that are important to you, both the role of technology in terms of the future, in terms of solving some of our core issues, especially climate control, but other issues pertaining to the economy, and then the role of government. Do you think that government needs to play a bigger role in technological issues, for example, when it comes to network neutrality? Certainly there's been a lot of debate about the role of government in running the networks. Also in terms of spectrum, if you become president, what would be your policy both towards network neutrality and spectrum?
I'm a big proponent of network neutrality. On the issue of spectrum,
why on network neutrality? Why are you a proponent?
Because, I mean, look, this is a whole new domain here. And we need to keep it open and free every bit as much as the sea lanes of the earth are kept open and free. It's an important, it's part of our ethic as Americans. It's part of our ethos. And I believe it's what is going to allow our world to make progress, is that we keep this worldwide web of compassion and intelligence sharing and information sharing open and free to all. On the issue of spectrum, what do you mean on the issue of spectrum?
Well, there's a scarcity of spectrum in terms of mobile technology, Some of that spectrum is owned by larger media companies or old-style television companies or media companies. And to bring, say, 5G and mobile eventually, you're probably going to need more spectrum, and the role of government in terms of auctioning it off is, again, a controversial one. Do you have a position on making sure that we have the fastest mobile networks in the world?
Yeah, I think it's a huge priority for us, every bit as much as a national highway system now. I mean, when I think of spectrum, I think of it in terms of infrastructure. And I'm not a big fan of toll roads and toll highways. I think there are things that we can do together as a people to build a common platform that contributes to the well-being of all of us. And that's how I've thought about this.
So you see digital as the infrastructure, the road system of the 21st century?
I do. And in our own state, we were very aggressive in going after the broadband dollars that were in that first Recovery and Reinvestment Act, and have done a damn good job. We already had a kind of run and go on it before President Obama was elected, but we have a pretty robust system of broadband throughout our state, including in our rural areas. I think I've put forward 15 strategic goals for moving our country forward. One of those goals, partly related to this, is that we need to restore the guidance that once existed in terms of antitrust and our Justice Department. Woodrow Wilson used to say that economic freedom means freedom from monopoly. And there has been such concentrations of corporate power in our economy and in our country. We need to be mindful that those concentrations don't lead to a point where spectrum becomes overtaken by monopolies and turned into toll roads. I saw this firsthand. I was elected one of two leaders year in and year out on homeland security and preparedness issues. And the way that some of the big corporate entities and telecom wanted to jump our spectrum for public safety and take it from us and then pat us on the back and say, no, but it's okay, we'll let you come over here and take this little piece. I mean, even I can't imagine the sort of I mean, I saw firsthand that concentration of corporate power in the halls of Congress on something as important and fundamental as security and public safety. So I think it's important that we make sure that we don't allow big, powerful monopolies to take over spectrum and broadband.
Speaking of antitrust, any concern on your part of these large new Silicon Valley companies, the Googles, the Facebooks, the Amazons of this world, becoming monopolies?
I think we have to be on guard in every sector of our economy. The pendulum has swung so far from maintaining and enforcing fair market American capitalism, free from monopoly concentration. And then back in the 80s, we started hearing this term consumer convenience. Well, maybe a little bit of monopoly will make for some cheaper goods and better efficiencies. In Iowa, where I spend a lot of time, in addition to Silicon Valley.
I wonder why you're in Iowa, right?
Yeah, well, they used to have 12 packing houses. This is just one, for example. 12 packing houses where hog farmers could sell their hogs. Now they're down to about 4 or 5. And while the hog farmers have become more productive than ever, they're getting a lower price than ever. So I believe in fair market American capitalism. That means free from monopolies and concentrations of power. And I would certainly give that directive to our Justice Department. And that would apply in all sectors of our economy.
Finally, Martin, you're clearly a network guy. You're clearly wired. What are the websites that you depend on? And to what extent has technology changed your own life?
Well, I don't think a day or a moment goes by when we're not Googling something. The amount of information, as you might imagine, that I have to process and share in the briefing papers is huge and happens rapidly. And even as I travel around with the young staff who are doing terrific work, I mean, they don't drive from point A to point B without relying on technology. So it's changed so many things in so many ways. And I also use Dropbox all the time.
What are you doing with Dropbox?
That's how we share all sorts of things.
Okay.
my schedule, the briefing papers.
Twitter and
debate
Facebook,
club.
social networks?
On the communications aspect, sure, we use Twitter all the time.
Or you personally, though? I mean, do you use it?
Of course. No, you think I simply rely on elves? No, I use Twitter all the time.
And checking on your rivals as well?
Checking on my rivals. I don't check so much on my rivals. I have dedicated staff
Well,
who do that.
but just keeping up to date with what's going on in the world.
Oh, sure. In terms of news and information, I enjoy reading a newspaper, but honestly, it's a luxury on the road because I do almost all my work from an iPad, and so I get a briefing on the news of the day, and if I want to go deeper, then I'm clicking on to that site. So all of this has changed so dramatically from just 15 years ago. In fact, I do when if I'm writing speeches or those sorts of things, I do those on the iPad too. When I read in the morning and I find things that I think could be inspiring or useful in communicating, those go into Evernote. So I use all sorts of things.
Well, Governor Martin O'Malley, it's a real pleasure and honor, and appreciate your insights, your thoughts on our networked economy and our future. And I will be back in November 2016 to maybe celebrate your presidency.
Hey,
thank you so much.
You'd be very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.